quickly talk about the Enneagram virtues. So this is ideally what we are striving for. Our type is supposed to be like, this is our path out of our patterns, our programs. But I actually believe that it's what's in our shadow as well. It's what's in our golden shadow. So I'll just quickly go over them. For one, that's serenity. For two, that's humility. For three, that's truthfulness. For four, that's equanimity. So that's without ill will. That's abundant calm, being exalted. For five, that's detachment or non-attachment. Non-attachment makes more sense to me, which I'll go into in a second. Six is courage. Seven is sobriety. Eight is innocence. And nine is action. So the reason that I believe these virtues are in our shadow is because basically we are trying to do this in the wrong way.
We're doing our type wrong. Everybody's doing their type wrong. Unconsciously, of course, we're trying to achieve our type's virtue backwards because our virtue also feels dangerous to us. It's part of our personality trap. It's part of that whole obstacle course that is our ego. So when you're looking at the virtues, you might look at some of them and say, like, what do you mean you can just be? What do you mean you can just be truthful and authentic? What do you mean you can just be present and sober? What do you mean you can just trust yourself? If some of these look like shocking to you, then it's probably pointing to something in your type makeup. So for, two is the reason that I put openly selfish beside humility was because they create self-importance and selfishness by virtue of helping others. So it's like a roundabout way of just being openly selfish. It's like you can just cut the middleman out and not have to overgive all these people to get that hit where you get to feel okay to do the thing you really want to do. You can just do the thing you really want to do. And for sixes or six fixers, it's like courage, self-trust. What do you mean I can just trust myself? What do you mean I have to I have to consult with, this person or that person. I have to do a lot of research, figure out who the experts are, what the trusted sources are. It's like, no, baby, you might even be able to just sit there and meditate and channel and get your answer out of the cosmic Google, okay? Cosmic internet browser. So if any of these concepts seem shocking to you, great. This is giving you more shadow material to work with. So our personality, our ego, creates a tangled web, hoops to jump through, beliefs, blocks, imaginary threats, and those things, that obstacle course is our fixation. It's our personality's fixation, and you will have one in each center. And you'll probably notice your core, your wing, whatever's in your heart, your head, your gut. And I will be doing a separate video on the fixation, but I want to still cover it a little bit just to give context to the virtue part of this conversation. Our ego tells us that if we do our fixation, we will achieve the virtue. But it doesn't actually work that way. Like I said, you just have to let go in order to achieve the virtue. You just have to be that way. Just be that way. But our fixation tells us, no, this is how we get to that point. So I'll just do a quick overview of the fixations. But again, there will be a separate video for this. So for one, that's judging by fixating on perfecting, criticizing, fixing. Then I can become serene. Then I can finally let go. No, that's not how it works, right? For two, it's flattery. It's ingratiating themselves into others' lives. When I do that, then I can finally be selfish. For three, it's vanity. It's achievements, desirability. Then I can finally be my authentic self. Then I can finally feel worthy. So for four, that's melancholy. That's overly focusing on emotional depth, separation, the negative. Woe is me. And, nines can do a little bit of this too, but what fours do is they amplify it. It becomes this almost operatic, ridiculous thing, but that's a roundabout way of achieving detachment and equanimity. It's I have to keep fixating on this frustration point that bothers me and stirs up all these emotions in the hopes that it will stop causing all these emotions. But of course it won't, because our fixation is the well that we continue to suckle on. It is each of these things we are doing unconsciously. It is our sippy juice. It is our wine. It is our MDMA. It is sex addiction. It is what we lust after unconsciously. It's horrible to say it maybe like this, but it is what it is. We are kind of slaves to these fixations until we're not. And how you become not a slave is to draw conscious awareness to it. So for 5, that's retention. That's being stingy, hoarding, withholding, protecting everything inside of you, keeping the outside world out. And eventually then you can be open. Then you can accept the world because you protected yourself sufficiently and competently from the world. For 6s, that's cowardice, so outsourcing trust. And then you think eventually when I know enough, when I've, figured it all out, then I can trust, then I can have the courage. For 7s, that's going into planning, which, I'm a 7 and I really didn't resonate with that at all when I first read planning. What do you mean planning? And then now I catch myself doing it now. It's horrible. Because you get so excited on the new thing, the possibilities, the novelty, the options, and then you might abandon something that you've already been working on for a while because it's so juicy. But what we're really seeking is that presence, that ability to be present. We'll find the juiciest TT that enables us to finally be present, finally enjoy and be satisfied with what we have. No, you have to literally be that way in order to experience that. I'm laughing because once you get so far down the self-help rabbit hole, you just start to see how absurd all of this crazy ego stuff is. And it becomes easier and easier to let go of a lot of the stuff. Or when you catch yourself in the act, you're like, oh my God, I'm doing it again. And it just becomes funny. It doesn't become as sticky and horrible and embarrassing and cringe as it was initially. So for 8s, their fixation is vengeance. It's becoming invulnerable. It's becoming the monster that they're afraid of so that they can get back to that kind of childlike innocence, so they can finally be vulnerable. So it's like they've kept out all of the bad people and now they can finally relax. And that's not how it works again. And for 9, that's indolence, which is like numbness, inertia, quote unquote harmony. So 9s are known as like the peacemaker, but they're trying to create harmony within themselves, right? And then they'll take action. Once they know that what they're going to do isn't going to hurt anybody, it's not going to cause conflict, it's not going to cause a big upset, they're not going to have to deal with somebody going crazy on them, then they'll take action. And I'm not saying that 9s don't take action on other stuff. Of course they do. And I know a lot of very productive 9s, but they're probably not taking action in a way that feels very self-focused or selfish, quote unquote, doing what they truly want inside, which is why I put aligned and self-oriented action for the virtue.
So each type is overdoing their sin, their vice, their fixation. They're overdoing it to overcompensate for this area in which they feel they lack, that they don't have within them. And they're doing it wrong, basically, because they're not just allowing themselves to be in that state. They're overdoing it in order to accomplish this thing that they can't accomplish by what they're doing. Hence the personality trap. And it all comes from a space of lack for each type, because they feel that they cannot just be this way. They have to overdo this thing to achieve that thing. But this is why it's so important to integrate. And this is why I believe that our virtues are in our shadow, is because it does feel like this thing, this blind spot, this missing piece that we can't access. We can't just be. But the beautiful thing about the shadow is that as much as there's the things that you don't want to feel about yourself in the shadow, you don't want to own, there's also the golden shadow. And that is who you already are when you just allow.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the vice, otherwise known as the sin. So sometimes fixations are also known as the passions of the Enneagram. So I know that it can get confusing because there's lots of terms if you're new to the Enneagram, but this is sort of how it is. So vice is interchangeable with sin, passion is interchangeable with fixation. And the concept that I introduced in this workshop is the personality trap. And that works in synergy with everything else, because to me, the trap is really important because it's that ego mechanism. It is what we are doing to fuck ourselves over. So I've added it as an element to the vice or the sin so that it kind of helps explain it further. Because the way I see it is that the trap creates the vice. The trap creates the sin. So I will go further into this in another video on the vices, but I just want to introduce this concept again while we're talking about the virtues so that it all starts to come together. And I would encourage you to rewatch a bunch of these videos too, especially if you're new to the Enneagram, so that you can really comprehend what's happening. You don't need to understand it in order to do the integrations, though. The exercises, you can just do those regardless, and they'll still have a huge impact. But I really like understanding how things work and why I'm doing something. So that's why I include a lot of context in these, because I do feel like it actually helps your unconscious and conscious mind bring ideas and concepts into a higher level of comprehension. So the personality trap, which I introduced to you before, which is if I'm not like this, if I don't do this, I don't exist. So for ones, that's if I don't overdo perfection, if I don't overdo like that competency frustration of making things right, making things perfect, making things exactly how they're supposed to be, then I don't exist. So I do see the vice, the sin, as more of an outward manifestation, one that we're often really blind to. Like it's actually like, I think, sort of a thing that we don't actually acknowledge or see in ourselves unless we really have something happen where that draws our attention to it, or we do like self-work. So because ones don't like to see themselves as angry. They think that they're refined, they're proper, like they're doing things the right way. But a lot of other people see ones as angry, or like they're kind of holding in this rage because they're so critical, and that criticality comes across as anger. And for twos, overdoing nurturing comes across as a kind of pride to other people. Like that's the vice, is that they're disowning that aspect of themselves that has pride in they're the nurturer, they're the one everybody needs. Without them, everything would fall apart, and there's pride in that, but they don't see that in themselves. And like going through this material can be highly triggering again. So just allow and hold grace and don't judge yourself if anything comes up for you when I'm saying this. This is the grimy good stuff, okay? So for threes, that's they overdo their value, their worth, their achievements, needing to be the best, needing to stand out, needing to be the exemplar. And that shows up for them as deceit, because in order to often get ahead, or in order to get where they want to go, they are having to put on masks. They're having to put on false selves, different selves for different people, inauthentic expressions, which to them probably doesn't feel inauthentic, right? Because they're just doing their personality pattern. But to others, it's received sometimes as phony. When you realize like, hey, that person told me this, but then they told this other person that, like, were they just saying that? Like, did they even mean it? And it can feel like, to be on the receiving end. Again, every type is doing a version of this that feels not great to other people, especially depending on their type. So I'm not judging any type more than the other. Okay, so for fours, it looks like I have a typo, overdose, but I kind of want to leave that because I love fours overdose on their own depth and separateness. That really feels right to me. They do overdose on it, on their own, like self-focused, self-oriented. Oh, I'm so different. I'm so unique. Oh, no one understands me. It's my curse. I'm the cursed one. But that comes out as envy because, which they might not even be conscious of. I think a lot of people that are conscious of their own envy are not fours. They're actually usually threes or sixes. So I hate to break that to you. If you highly identify with being envious of others, to me, at least in my lived experience, it's threes and sixes who are the most envious. For fours, their envy is a little bit different. It comes through as more like seeing like, look at that, what they did. Like, I'm not like that. I'm separate. I'm different. It's more of this, like, those people, well, they just get ahead because they're phony. They just get ahead because they're gold digger or whatever. It's like, they might be like, want to be deep down like some kind of artist, like who's really acknowledged for their talents and their unique gifts, and then they see others and then they write them off as like, well, they're untalented and they just got ahead because it's normies who like their stuff or whatever. Like, it's a different kind of envy. It's more of like an inactive sort of self-sabotaging envy than, again, like I said, like, I just wanted to add this as a clarifier because it does bother me. Okay, and for fives, avarice. So they overdo withholding via specialization and objectivity. So it's sort of like, I feel like 4 and 5 sort of mirror each other, but 4s are more the emotional avarice side of things, like the emotional burrowing into themselves, and fives are burrowing into a competency area. So they're sort of both doing the same thing, but one's doing it in the mental center and one's doing it in the heart center. And so fives overdo, like they become so objective and specialized, and they're almost removing themselves from their humanity in some ways. It like protects them. And that can be seen as by other people as being very withholding, too removed, like cold, too neutral, not interested, like just completely on their own planet. So sixes overdo security, and that shows up as fear. So they want to feel secure, they want to feel safe, whether that's socially with their self-pres needs being met, like, you know, like having enough resources, having enough support, making sure that like the house isn't going to catch on fire, making sure that like the doors lock properly. It can, in the sexual realm, it can be like making sure that their partner is fully into them and they're not looking at other people. And it can show up as like this need for security can show up as insecurity, which is fear that they're going to lose something, that someone's going to hurt them, they're going to be left out in the cold, they're going to be abandoned. And I mean, the thing is, like, some of these things that I'm talking about in the context of types, like, all people can experience these various things at different points in their life, but the personality is typically doing a specific one over and over and over and over again, like a wind-up toy that keeps hitting a wall. So for seven, they overdo freedom, which leads to this external orientation of gluttony, where it's like, I want. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go to this party. I'm going to go be with this person, with that person. I have all these friends. I have all these interests. I'm learning banjo. I'm learning how to be an astrologer. I'm learning how to be a trapeze artist. So it's a gluttony of sorts, in the sense that they're just like kind of always consuming or doing a variety of things. And so their problem is like they have to pick something. Speaking from my own pain. Eights overdo power, and that comes out as a lust. You know, it's like flared nostrils, anger. It's a different kind of anger than one, because anger's one is like pointed. It's about fixing things, correcting things. It's the red pen energy, and eights is more like the Red Bull energy. It's like stampede, like get out of my way, like you're out of here, you're fired, like this kind of thing. It's just more cutting off, or the rejection. And they do it with such like chutzpah, with such flair as a reactive type, that it's sort of how they flex their power, right? How they sort of feel important in the world. And nine's trap is that they overdo inner peace, and that shows up as sloth. So that shows up as numbing out, zoning out, not being present. It's a different kind of not being present than what sevens do. They're just dissociating. It's like, oh, this is causing me internal turmoil, so I'm just going to like pretend it's not happening. Or there's these people fighting around me, I'm not going to pick a side, I'm just going to stay neutral and hope it goes away. Or I'm in a relationship that's making me unhappy, but instead of saying what's making me unhappy, I'm just going to accept it. But what happens is then it shows up as passive aggression and all this other stuff. So it's like not taking action on what they want because they're afraid of losing that inner peace. And what you might have noticed is that the virtue is the polar opposite of the vice, and obviously vice versa. So we have, for nine, it's like action. Well, that's opposite is sloth. For one, serenity, the opposite is anger. Humility for two, and pride, obviously. Three, truthfulness, authenticity, deceit, and so on and so forth. And so that's why this is included in the shadow work course, because whatever we are in resistance to, whatever we are avoiding, whatever we hate, whatever we neglect in ourselves, whatever we say, that's not me, I'm not like that, that means that we need to integrate it. Because basically what our personality type is doing is it's overdoing something. And the way to bring it into balance is to integrate the polar opposite. So that's our virtue. So we might actually see ourselves in some ways in the more virtue side of things. We might actually feel like, oh, well, I'm actually a very courageous person. I'm actually a very present person. I'm a very humble person. But you're probably not. So what we're going to do in upcoming exercises will be to integrate those polar opposites, which is super important for getting yourself out of your personality trap, out of those ego mechanisms, from breaking those patterns that you're doing on autopilot without even meaning to. And this thus frees you to actually create the life that you want, to manifest. This is a huge part of manifesting that, like, most manifesting, like, gurus or whoever, they don't even talk about any of this stuff. But it's like, if you are able to actually integrate this and you're interested in manifestation, this will be the key to unlocking a lot of what you want. So please stay present, take notes, do the exercises, because this, at the end of the tunnel, there is light, and it's sparkly and it's wonderful, but you have to be able to go through the swamp in order to get it.
For one, they are trying to achieve serenity by having a tight grip on anger, by being perfect, by being right. This is how they will get serenity. But it's because they do that, they overdo that personality aspect, that they can't have serenity. It feels unattainable to them. It's something they're always striving for in their frustration pattern.
And this might be something that you recognize in yourself or in other people. Oftentimes it comes out as, being super critical, being judgmental, perfectionistic, pointing to what's bad, what's wrong, what doesn't work, what's inefficient, what's unacceptable, what needs to be fixed. And because it's subconscious, like, a lot of the time ones are one fixers, they don't even really know what they're doing. They don't know that they're being hypercritical. And even though they're like a frustration type, which is an idealistic type on some level, they're the visionary types, 1, 4, and 7. It can also seem incredibly negative, especially when it's accompanied with, like, say, a 6 or a 4. Like, it creates this ultra picky, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. But what's happening is it's the projection of what's happening internally, externally, because, it can often come out about, like, picking up on what's wrong with others, what's wrong with things, what's wrong with society, these kinds of things, what doesn't work. And if they just allow people to be people, allow themselves just to be people, then that need starts to dissolve. But they have to feel safe in order to be able to do that, because all of these things are constructs of the subconscious mind, the ego, and the personality, which makes it feel very dangerous. But that's why we're doing these integrations. That's why I'm talking about all of this stuff, and there will be an integration for this. So I really hope that this helps you if you are 1 or 1 fixed, or if you know someone in your life who's like this, because if they are like this to you, a lot of people have parents that have 1 influence, and it's rough. It's truly rough. But just know that it's basically a projection of what goes on inside of themselves and not a reflection on you. And that's also part of shadow work too, right? Is accepting that these things that we took on when we were younger were actually reflections from inside of the people who took care of us and the adults around us, not actually anything about ourselves.
2, it's humility. So 2's, like, vice or sin, however you want to call it, is pride. That's their personality trap. So because they're unwilling to see themselves as not needed, because they're having to see themselves as necessary, they know what's right, they know what you want, they can't actually be humble. They can't have that humility. And it's funny because I think almost every 2 you would meet would never be like, I don't believe that about myself, I'm very humble. Because they're giving to you, which is self-sacrificing. They're overdoing it to create this humility in themselves, but they're not actually being humble. They're not actually embodying humility, because if you're embodying humility, you don't assume that you know what other people need or that people need you. And so they are giving to you, and it is great when you get on a 2's good side. If they're not being intrusive, they keep giving you shit. Fucking incredible. I have a 2 for a mom. It's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for all of the free things over the years. I love it. Even the ones that I don't want and I've had to secretly throw out, but love it. Loved all the free money and food over the years. Fantastic. But it's a way for them to keep generating that pride. So they never actually have humility until they release the need to have the pride. See what I'm saying? 3's Enneagram virtue is truthfulness, because they're not doing it on purpose, but they're inauthentic. They're deceptive. They're the vanity type. They are putting on an image of what they think will get them love, what they think will get them validation. They'll be seen, they'll be valued for who they are. And because they're doing it in a deceptive way where they're not doing it on purpose. We're all doing our personality type, but they're doing it. It's not true. It's not truly who they are. It's what they think you want them to be. It's what they think will get them what they need. And what they need is truth. What they need is authenticity. What they need is to have just this absolute self-love instead of trying to create it through false means. So when they collapse those two things together, inauthenticity and authenticity, that's when they become whole.
So type 4 is trying to achieve equanimity. So that's like even temperedness, calm, not becoming melodramatic and hysterical, to just taking things with neutrality. And they're trying to achieve that through envy. So that's by fixating on authenticity, separation, beauty, horror, darkness, the truth of the human condition, depth and beauty, not to be mistaken with 6's version of the truth, which is getting to the bottom of things, like rooting out the corruption, who's doing things wrong, which is more super ego influence, right? Like, who's the bad guy? What are they up to? I'm going to sniff out what those people are doing that they shouldn't be doing. For truth is more on the level of like, why are we here? What does it mean to be a human? What is love all about? What is suffering about? What is grief? Like, how does this all tie in together? It's like an artistic expression. And through over focus on that aspect, they will finally be able to be even tempered, calm, without ill will or frustration. So obviously you can see like that doesn't lead to that. And if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I'm a 4 and I do that. Like, I'm very calm. I like really practice even temperedness. Like, I don't let shit get the better of me. Then you're not a 4. So you're probably a 9 with a 4 fix perhaps. But this is like actually like a huge struggle for frustration types, which is 1, 4, and 7, to not be frustrated and to not be actively churning and emotionally turbulent, especially as 4s are frustration reactive types. So it's like they're going to be like just latching on to every little thing that creates a kind of emotional response in them because they're like, oh, I'm so deep. Like, oh my God, like arrow through the heart. Like this. 9s are already doing the calm and tempered thing. So like their path to growth is not being more calm. And 4, it's more like a churning of you're superficial and I'm not. Like, it's a very melodramatic, Shakespearean, ridiculous kind of experience. 4s seek equanimity and release from their ego's death grip by fixating on how different, unique, cursed, deep, romantic, dark, creatively separate they are, which of course only serves to do the opposite, as they often present as melodramatic, pretentious, moody, and cringily dark. I guess depending on which rabbit hole you're down with the Enneagram stuff, you either think 4 is like just like a creative soccer mom, or it's something that like is like, oh, it means that you're the most creative and artistic and super deep type, or you know what a 4 actually is, which is literally the most cringy. It's like the guy with like his shirt unbuttoned until the belly button, and he's got like dark hair tousling in the wind, and he's got like his sketchbook with him, and he's like pouting and drinking like red wine, and he won't, don't talk to me. Like, that's actually what a 4 is more like. It's very cringy in the real world. It's like leather pants with like a tie-up waist and like a billowing like bell-sleeved shirt kind of ridiculousness. The guy at like the poet meeting who's just so tortured and like inconsolable, but like he won't tell you what his problem is. It's just the vibe he's giving off. Like, that's what 4 actually is. So I'm not trying to rip on 4s, but a lot of people mistype as 4s. So I feel it's like my wing 6 duty. But fours can be just as equanimous and derive that sense of separation, depth, and uniqueness just by fully embracing that they're part of the human miasma. And their relatability will actually deepen both their experience and their expression. I think fours and fives and sixes operate in a space of real scarcity, and I think even kind of eights on some level. And so I think that there needs to be this embodiment of abundance where it's just trust and embodiment of this quality of being joyful and celebratory and appreciative and satisfied. With all frustration types, which is 1, 4, and 7, I think there can be this sense of settling if one does kind of show appreciation or gratitude for the mundane. But what it really does is that it actually amplifies what you do want in your life. And it doesn't mean that you're settling or that you're going to attract more of what you don't want. Because I think the frustration pattern is like, if I keep fixating on what I hate, then somehow it'll change, and it doesn't. If I keep fixating for the 4, it's like if I keep fixating on how superficial this is, how normal, how pathetic, like how basic, or like they're not in touch with themselves, they're not creative. And so this like overfixation on having to express how they're not superficial, how they're in touch with something deeper and darker and more meaningful, is what actually makes them almost like less so, because it's kind of embarrassing in some ways. It's like, oh my gosh, like they're making such a production of it that it's actually like borderline cliche. I'm kind of shitting on 4s, but it's a type that people really sort of put on a pedestal, and it's not. Like, it's a ridiculous type. It's a very ridiculous type when you actually see it in action. So type 5 is trying to achieve non-attachment. So by non-attachment, I mean openness, letting go via avarice, withholding, hoarding, objectivity, logic, competency, and specialization. Once they have that on lock, they'll finally be able to withstand the intrusive, invasive nature of reality. They seek non-attachment through means of actualizing some kind of competency concern, a specialization, insight that creates a rejection wall between them and the masses. By rejecting entanglements and emotional messiness, it allows them to fend off attacks, invasions, intrusions, and having to be part of the proletariat. So 5 and 9 often get confused. Other types also often think that they're 5. But the difference is that 5 is doing this on autopilot. They're not actually consciously rejecting everything and just in their own like little insular bubble, like a Teflon bubble that nothing penetrates or sticks to. A lot of other types that misidentify as 5 are really aware of having to reinforce these boundaries. And the 5 is more just doing it. It's not a thought process. It's not reactive. There's no like negotiation that takes place. They're just doing it. And so they can actually be really hard. They can actually be really hard to kind of penetrate for like other types that are trying to engage them on a more deep and personal level. They're often very withholding of like personal details about themselves. They might share a lot in the specific area that interests them and excites them, but they're often very walled off and private. And so 5's virtue that they are trying to achieve the wrong way is to be non-attached, to be open, to let go. And they do that by letting go of the fear, first of all, and just normalizing being present in the human experience that they reject, like actually participating, actually allowing people to come in, allowing another person's opinion if they've already decided on something and they already think they're an expert on something, to allow another person's insight. Also to have conversations about things that don't interest them. This is where 5 and 7 overlap, is that they can sort of reject anything that isn't in their interest realm. 7s is more out of boredom, and 5s is just more utilitarian. It's sort of like, well, what does this have to do with what I'm doing? What does this have to do with my competency obsession? That they kind of use they use it as almost like an excuse to not have to engage, because they're so focused on that thing, that obsession. But the thing that they're trying to get through that obsession, through that specialization, through that withholding, through that wall, is the ability to be open to what's on the other side of the wall, because they're so fearful on a deep subconscious level of not being able to withstand. So how they create that stability in themselves is to just keep proving to themselves over and over that they can do it.
And so 6 is virtue, and what's in their shadows is courage. It's courage. 6 is so the 6 is sin or vice, if you will, is fear. They overdo fear, and they overdo cowardice. Sorry guys.
So type 6 is trying to achieve courage, which I like to think of more as self-trust, via overdoing security. So they do this by outsourcing their thinking to others, experts, institutions, leaders, academia, books, someone they admire, etc. And a lot of 6s don't actually know that they do this. So I'm sorry if you feel triggered by this. It's not my intention. And they often seek agreement or support from those around them. And the thing is, this kind of behavior can manifest in kind of ways that hide from our consciousness. So it can be like, joining groups or communities or taking classes or something like that, which, of course, any type can do, but it kind of starts to show up in your relationship in those things because you're seeking stability and security, and you're kind of looking for a guidance function to answer things for you, to give you a lot of the mental security that you know enough, that you have the correct information. And so sometimes 6s can get really mad when they feel like they're getting the wrong information, or like the authority figure or the expert is not showing up in the way that they feel they should be. And you'll notice like super ego words. So that's 1, 2, and 6. There's a lot of shoulds that will probably show up in your language. Because when they feel like they finally know enough and they've garnered enough stability, then they can leave the nest, the metaphorical nest, and they can confidently trust themselves and they can like go out flying on their own. But this can often be a slow process depending on the age of the 6 and depending on what's going on in their life. They might return to this pattern over and over again. So when 6s trust themselves over others and turn inwards first versus outwards, they can build up that courage and self-confidence and self-assurance. And they can become like brave warriors and leaders and very insightful speakers, because security then is found from within, and it's not found from without. It's not found from outside of the self. Because when we're looking outside of ourselves for security, it actually means that inside we're insecure, even if we don't identify that. So filling that security up inside of yourself by yourself is actually really important. So learning to pull up trust, amplify trust, embody trust, and then let go of the outcomes. Because when you're fixated on outcomes, then that gets into the anxiety and the fear stuff, the worst case scenarios. And so even in the worst of circumstances, you won't be using up all of your mental energy spiraling and panicking if you just embody, I trust myself, I have this. Then it enables the 6 to become more self-assured, and it actually eases that anxiety and eases the fear, and because you're just embodying that trust and security from within. And that's actually the best place to be in for your nervous system when shit does hit the fan, because when we go into fight or flight, it drains all of our energy and blood from our brain and puts it into our body. So by being calm, you actually enable yourself to think better and think more clearly.
So 7's virtue is sobriety, and what that I mean, that can mean probably not drinking, but it's abstaining. It's like putting a cork on the gluttony, because 7's sin or vice is gluttony, and their fixation is planning. Again, I like really hate this term for 7s, but it's, to me, it's more fantasizing. It's more active fantasizing than anything. But it's like, it's never enough. What's in the present moment is never enough. More, I need more. It's never satisfying. As a frustration type, they're never satisfied, but because 7's a mental doing type, they will always be planning or creating these fantasies. These like ideas will always be coming to them. And what they're actually trying to achieve is sobriety, meaning this sense of calm and fullness of just being. I just am. I'm fine as I am. I don't need to stimulate myself. I don't need to distract myself. I don't need to see sparkly things. I don't need to be sparkly. It's just being. And so how the sober thing works, in my opinion anyways, it's more just like without adornment, without stimulation, without distraction, without razzle dazzle. It's just being.
It can also be presence, focus, calm. And so for me personally, I believe that gratitude and appreciation is something that sevens really need to lean into even more than the sobriety aspect. I think this applies to all frustration types, but seven specifically, because it sates that hunger, it sates that gluttony. And that gluttony is how the seven is trying to achieve that quote unquote sobriety. Again, I don't really like that term for a seven. I don't really think it actually hits the nail on the head. So sevens, and I'm a seven, so sevens pursue many interests, shiny objects, experiences, people. It can be like classes, it can be like learning different things. Some sevens are real thrill seekers. They're driven by frustration like Goldilocks. It's like they want to find the juiciest peach. They want to find the just right temperature porridge. It's a frustration thing. But what they're looking for is what will satiate them. And then they can finally settle down and be present. They can finally be appreciative. They can finally have gratitude because they finally got what they wanted. The problem is that there is no juicy, eternal, delicious peach. The seven can only truly experience presence, appreciation, gratitude, and freedom by allowing those sensations into the present moment, appreciating the boring instead of planning the next adventure or pursuit, staying with what is instead of what could be. And gratitude only attracts more frustration and disappointment. So finding the greener pastures within what they already have is the key to sevens actually getting what they want deep down. So again, if you're into the Enneagram, you might be like, oh, this is sort of like deviates a little bit from what I've learned. But as a frustration type, as a double frustration type and a seven, I really think that appreciation and gratitude is kind of seven's actual virtue. So you can take that information if you want, or you can just go with sobriety. But if you are a seven, then I would encourage you to try that, because especially if it feels triggering when you hear that. It's like, oh, appreciate what? No, this isn't exactly what I wanted. I want something else. Then that means you need to practice gratitude and appreciation. It's a good indicator usually.
And for 8, their virtue is innocence. The monster's virtue is innocence. The big boss, final boss, conquistador's virtue is innocence.
So type 8 is trying to achieve innocence. So that's vulnerability, openness, the kind of child that felt like it had to grow up too soon. Like right before that happened. That's kind of what they're trying to get back to. And they're trying to achieve that via lust. So that's obviously a very opposite emotion, just like that's obviously a very opposite condition, just like all of them. Maybe more noticeable with the 8 though, because they are such profoundly polar opposites. So 8s overdo power, expansion, acquisition, and domination. Once they finally feel safe in their rejection castle, that's a metaphor, then they finally allow themselves to let the wounded, vulnerable, innocent child out. That child that's inside of them, the one that felt like it had to puff up to protect itself or protect other people around it, like its brothers and sisters. That child that needed to experience being innocent and vulnerable and being able to trust, sort of like a 6 in some ways, but it's more not having to overcompensate because they're finally safe. And it can seem like life or death. So for all the types, it seems like life or death, but especially to 8, if they let their guard down, it can feel like truly threatening to their autonomy. Like they're going to be exploited, they're going to be taken advantage of. But 8s can only truly achieve like the true leadership and protector status that they want to have by becoming more benevolent and tapping into that innocence, that tenderness, that care, softness, vulnerability. They have to allow themselves to be attacked, to be betrayed, and to be exploited. And they'll probably find that they're pleasantly surprised by the relationships that they can build when they're not trying to control everyone and everything that might be in their field of view, or if they're not putting these walls up, these conditions up, these blockages, that they actually end up having much deeper, more meaningful relationships where they actually really can allow that inner child to be held and to be taken care of. And of course, like, it does of course invite hurt, but the thing is, like, you don't end up having like a full experience in reality as a human being, the kind that you're actually looking for, the kind that your heart's looking for, if you won't allow yourself to actually do that.
And for type 9, their Enneagram virtue is action, and their sin is sloth. Their fixation is indolence. So this is an action.
So I like to frame it in the way of aligned and self-propelled, self-initiated action. I think it's called right action usually in most Enneagram literature, but to me it's aligned. And so they're trying to do that via sloth. They overdo inaction, procrastination, dissociating from what they really want that is aligned to their true hearts by following other people's agendas. They get lost in it. It's not intentional or conscious. It just happens. And they usually do this in hopes, secretly or consciously, that they'll find the sustained motivation to do what they deeply desire and be who they truly want to be. And sometimes this can show up like, finding partners who are sort of like the idealized version of yourself, or like attaching to something that a partner's doing, or a friend, a close friend or friend group, what they're into. And then it's almost like trying to find that location or take action via other people's energy in some ways. By putting inner peace and harmony above their own desires, it creates a dissonance in themselves and resentment builds up. So it's actually really important for nines to locate what they desire outside of these relationships, and even just outside of their environment, because like nines can kind of merge with their surroundings, with the culture, with their kind of lifestyle. Like if they get into a rut, they can just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that, again, like that's because it creates inner peace and harmony, like the numbness, the sort of sloth. Even if the person's doing stuff, but they're kind of sleeping, they're doing it in a sleeping state. And we're all kind of doing things in a sleeping state when we're not conscious to our patterns, but 9 is more doing it actively in that kind of dissociated realm. Yeah, a really important thing is to take action towards what you deeply want inside. And if you're not sure about what that is, then try different things out. And that could be through friends at first, but then finding your own path, using that maybe as that little step, but then keep chasing your own path, experimenting. What do I really like? And always checking in with yourself. Do I really want to do this? Do I want to say no to this? Do I want to say yes to this? And actually sticking to what comes up for you, what feels right for you. And regardless of whether that causes short-term conflict, like, sometimes 9s can be afraid of saying no because of this, or rubbing somebody the wrong way, or causing another person discomfort. And then by virtue of that, it will cause you discomfort. So just like leaning into that and letting it happen, because the more the 9 practices this, the more aligned they become to their true heart's desires, and the more aligned their actions become. And that's when they completely actualize into who they were always meant to be. And they're able to bring their 9 gifts out into the world, and however that manifests, and live the most satisfying version of their own life, where they're the captain of the boat. And you might want to co-captain with other people, but it's really important to make sure you know exactly where you really want to go.